There is a calculation error that almost everyone makes without realizing it. The belief that victory comes from the outside in, through a new job, a relationship that finally works, a higher number in the bank account. You spend years waiting for life to change first, only to then allow yourself to change. But Carl Jung observed something uncomfortable about the real order of events. The winning stage never arrives before the mask falls. It arrives afterward. And what you feel now, this nameless discomfort, this sensation that something inside you is quietly coming undone, is not a sign that you are breaking. It is a sign that you are about to win. Only, no one told you that victory, before it appears, must first destroy everything you thought was you. There is a specific moment, almost always unnoticed, when a person stops recognizing their own life. The same conversations that once filled the day now sound hollow. The same people who once gave meaning to the afternoons now seem to be speaking of a world to which you no longer belong. It is not boredom. It is not ingratitude. It is the first symptom of a process that Jung described with surgical precision, the collapse of the old identity. Before any real transformation, there is a rupture. And this rupture does not come with a warning. It does not come with ceremony. It comes as a void that settles in the places where there was once enthusiasm. The body is the first to notice. Long before the mind understands what is happening, the body has already begun to refuse what no longer serves it. You wake up tired of things that never tired you before. A party that was once a reason for joy now seems like a burden. A routine that once provided security now seems like a decorated prison. This is not depression in disguise, nor a weakness of character. It is the ego starting to lose control over the narrative you have told yourself for years. And the ego, when it feels it is losing ground, does not retreat in silence. It fights, it screams through anxiety, through guilt, through the sudden urge to return to being who you were before you started to see. Imagine someone sitting at a birthday table, surrounded by the same people as always, hearing the same jokes as always, and feeling for the first time with clarity that they are watching their own life from the outside, like someone watching a movie seen too many times. No one has changed seats. The food is the same, the music is the same, the faces are the same. The only thing that has changed is the person sitting there, and that is precisely why everything seems strange. It is not that the party has become dull. It is that the old version of you, the one who laughed easily and was content with little, is no longer in charge. This type of scene repeats itself, with variations, in millions of lives. The dinner that goes by too slowly, the conversation that seems too empty, the silence in the car on the way home that weighs more than it should. These are symptoms of the same process, disguised as common boredom. Jung called this old identity the persona, the social mask built, brick by brick, to be acceptable in the eyes of others. And here is a translation no one gave you in school. That weariness you feel after socializing, that exhaustion that no night of sleep resolves, is not physical tiredness. It is the exhaustion of performing a version of yourself carefully edited to keep others comfortable. You are not tired of being with people. You are tired of not being yourself in front of them. And when that mask begins to crack, the world around it seems to crack as well, is because in truth it was the mask that sustained the world you knew, not you. The old identity does not dissolve by conscious choice. It dissolves because it has stopped fulfilling its original function, to keep you safe, to keep you accepted, to keep you alive within a system of psychological survival that you built when you were still too small to defend yourself in any other way. That need for validation that today seems exaggerated, that fear of disappointing others that today seems disproportionate, were born as survival strategies. They worked for decades, but every strategy that grows old without being revised turns into a prison. And it is precisely when that prison starts to become too small for the person you are becoming that the collapse begins. Not because you have gotten worse, but because you have stopped fitting into the old version of yourself. And here is the first cold truth you must accept. This collapse is not a mistake on your path. It is the path. Before any genuine awakening, there is a demolition. No one builds a new structure on the rubble of one that is still standing. Life, with an almost cruel precision, begins to remove what no longer serves. People, environments, certainties, long before it shows what comes next. And it is precisely in this void, in this nameless space between who you were and who you do not yet know you are, that the true winning phase begins to form. Silently, without asking for permission, after the old identity begins to crack, something curious happens. The mind that once propelled you forward turns, overnight, into your main opponent. You feel a new clarity, a glimpse of who you could become, and, in the next second, a wave of doubt so strong it seems to exist only to paralyze you. This is not weakness, it is biology doing what it has always done, protecting the organism from the unknown, even when the unknown is, in fact, your liberation. The human brain was not designed to seek happiness, it was designed to seek predictability. And herein lies the cruelest conflict of transformation. The familiar, even when painful, is processed by the nervous system as safe, simply because it has been survived before. The new, even when promising, is processed as a threat because it has no survival history recorded yet. That is why so many people choose, repeatedly, to return to relationships that drain them, jobs that suffocate them. Versions of themselves that they already know deep down are no longer true. It is not a love for suffering. It is the brain confusing the known with the safe. This is the struggle that Jung described as the confrontation between the ego and the process of individuation. The ego wants to remain recognizable to others and to itself. Individuation, on the other hand, demands that you gradually become someone that perhaps even you do not recognize at first. And it is in this interval, in this uncertain territory between the person who is dying and the person who is being born, that anxiety settles in with the greatest force. You feel the urge to retreat not because the new path is wrong, but because it has no proof yet. And the mind, trained over a lifetime to demand evidence before acting, panics in the face of its absence. Notice the pattern. You make a decision aligned with who you are becoming, ending a relationship that has already died, leaving an environment that drains you, saying no to something you would have previously said yes to automatically, and hours later, the doubt arrives like a flood. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm throwing away something good? This doubt is not your inner compass speaking. It is the old system, the same one that kept you safe during years of emotional survival, trying to regain the control it is losing. Do not mistake the volume of the doubt for its validity. Systems that are dying always scream the loudest at the end. And it is precisely at this point, when you feel your inner world cracking, when doubt screams louder than clarity, when part of you wants to evolve and another part begs to go back to what it already knew, that most people quietly give up on their own process. Not because the path was wrong, but because no one gave them a map to cross this phase without getting lost in it. It was exactly for this moment that I prepared the Código do Despertar. It is not empty motivation or a catchy phrase to alleviate discomfort for a few hours. It is an inner map built upon the psychology of Carl Jung, structured over 60 days, where you receive daily a key, a question, and a declaration to cross exactly this crossing between who you were and who is being born. You read, perform a concrete micro-action, and record the reflection in your diary. And day after day, the doubt that seems immense today begins to lose the power to paralyze you because you stop walking blindly. If any part of what you just read touched something real, comment, Eu escolho evoluir, and go to the first pinned comment. It is not about reading one more piece of content. It is about stopping going through this phase alone. After doubt loses part of its strength, something even more uncomfortable begins to happen. Silence, and not silence as an absence of sound, silence as an absence of people. Friendships that seemed eternal begin to drift apart for no apparent reason. Environments that once brought pleasure begin to seem artificial. Habits that filled free time start to sound like noise, and the person going through this, without understanding what is happening, usually reaches a wrong conclusion. They think they are being punished. They think they did something wrong. They think they are isolating themselves out of weakness. But isolation, when it arises in this way, not as an escape, but as a genuine inability to continue pretending to have interest in what no longer makes sense, is not punishment. It is preparation. Jung called this process individuation, the gradual movement through which a person separates themselves from collective masks to discover who they are when no one is looking. And this process, by definition, requires distance. Not because the people around you are bad, but because it is impossible to hear your own inner voice while the volume of others' expectations is turned up to the max. Think of a plant that has been kept for years inside a pot that is too small for its roots. It survives up to a point, but never fully blooms, because the space around it never allowed for real growth. When it is finally transplanted to larger soil, there is a period where it seems to wilt, where the leaves fall, where everything indicates fragility. Someone who doesn't understand gardening thinks the plant is dying. Someone who does understands that it is redirecting energy to its roots, adjusting to the new space before growing for real. Human isolation works in a similar way. From the outside, it looks like wilting. From the inside, it is a redirection of energy, from social performance to internal construction. Think about the last time you made a decision that was truly your own, not influenced by what your family expected, by what your friends would approve of, by what would seem right on social media. For many people, that memory is difficult to find, not because there was a lack of opportunity, but because their entire lives were organized around pleasing, fitting in, belonging. And belonging, when built upon performance, has a silent price. You never discover who you would be if you stopped performing. The isolation you are feeling now is the first real opportunity to discover that answer. Here it is worth dismantling another concept that Jung treated with depth and which is rarely explained in a useful way: the shadow. The shadow is not a monster hidden inside you. It is simply everything you have buried in order to keep being loved. The anger you swallowed so as not to be called difficult. The ambition you hid so as not to bother those who had less. The boundary you never set for fear of being abandoned. Buried things do not disappear. They ferment. And sooner or later they leak, as resentment, as inexplicable exhaustion, as disproportionate irritation in the face of small situations. The silence and isolation of this phase are, in truth, the only space where you are finally able to face what you buried, instead of continuing to fuel the leak. This also explains why certain people around you seem to distance themselves exactly when you begin to change. It is not a coincidence, and it is not a personal rejection. Relationships built on the old version of you were often built on unconscious psychological contracts, unspoken agreements where you played a specific role, the available one, the one who solves everything, the one who never disagrees, in exchange for acceptance. When you stop fulfilling that role, the contract is broken. And the breakup, however painful it may seem, is not the end of something good. It is the confirmation that that connection depended on a mask, not on you. After the distancing, after the silence, something begins to reorganize from within. And it is exactly at this point that most people get stuck, because the loneliness of this phase, without a method to accompany it, can turn into giving up disguised as going back to normal. Have you noticed how much easier it is to evolve when there is a guided process, with the right questions on the right days, instead of trying to decipher everything alone in the dark? This is exactly what the Código do Despertar delivers: 60 days of structured support to cross the silence without getting lost in it. Comment: Eu escolho evoluir, on the first pinned comment, and receive the path. Curiously, it is after this silent crossing that reality begins to behave in a different way. People who seemed irrelevant until then suddenly cross your path. Opportunities that once seemed distant begin to emerge with a strange naturalness. A random conversation reveals exactly the information you needed. Jung named this phenomenon synchronicity, coincidences loaded with meaning, external events that seem to mirror, with uncomfortable precision, what is happening inside you. The cold explanation behind this has nothing mystical about it, although it may seem so. When your consciousness changes, what you notice in the world changes along with it. You do not start attracting different things by magic. You start to perceive, with more clarity, what was previously invisible to your eyes, because your attention was too busy keeping the old identity alive. Internal transformation always precedes external transformation, not the other way around. And that is exactly why so many people get stuck waiting for the world to change first. They have inverted the correct order of the process. They wait for external proof before accepting internal change, when in reality, external proof only appears after internal change has already happened. This means that the signs you are starting to notice now, that person who appeared at the right time, that idea that came out of nowhere, that door that opened without apparent effort, are not rewards for luck. They are reflections. The world out there is beginning to respond to a version of you that is no longer operating out of fear, validation, or survival. And the more you recognize these signs, instead of dismissing them as coincidence, the faster this new reality consolidates. The most challenging part of this phase, however, is not recognizing the signs. It is definitively abandoning the identity built upon pain. Because there is a specific type of person who clings to their own suffering without realizing it, not out of masochism, but because pain at some point became their identity. I am someone who has always been betrayed. I am someone who never had any luck. I am someone who needs to prove themselves to be recognized. These phrases sound like descriptions. In reality, they are prisons, because everything you repeat about yourself, the mind actively works to confirm. A survival mentality is not just a way of thinking. It is an entire operating system, installed back in childhood, whose only priority is to avoid pain, even if the price of that is giving up everything that could generate joy. Surviving and living are not the same thing. Surviving means spending energy avoiding the worst-case scenario. Living means spending energy building the best-case scenario. And the transition between these two modes necessarily requires that you stop identifying with the trauma you have carried for so long. There is a type of person who spends their entire life collecting achievements like someone collecting defense evidence for a trial that never arrives. The diploma hanging on the wall, the position attained, the body worked to exhaustion. All of this can be born from a genuine place of purpose, or it can be born from a completely different place. The urgent need to finally be enough in the eyes of someone who, deep down, perhaps was never really paying attention. You can tell the difference by a simple detail. When the achievement arrives and the relief lasts only a few days before the mind is already looking for the next piece of evidence to exhibit, that is not healthy ambition. It is survival disguised as success. Here is a distinction that changes everything. You can have gone through something painful without that pain needing to continue being who you are. The need for approval, for example, that constant thirst for external recognition, almost always stems from a specific moment where love seemed conditional. A child who only received attention when they got good grades learns all too early that being seen requires performance. And decades later, as an adult, that same person continues to chase applause that will never fill the original void, because the void was never about the applause. It was about being loved without needing to deserve it. Abandoning the survival mentality means stopping the search for recognition and starting to seek alignment. It means swapping the question, "What will others think of this?" for the question, "Is this aligned with who I truly am?" It is a silent exchange, but it reorganizes absolutely everything. Professional choices, relationships, the way you react to criticism, what you tolerate, and what you no longer tolerate. And it is precisely here, at this turning point, between living to be approved and living to be authentic, that most people get stuck, because no one taught them how to make this disconnection without guilt. After recognizing the external signs, after starting to let go of the identity built upon pain, there comes perhaps the quietest and most misunderstood phase of the entire transformation, the void. A period where, apparently, nothing happens. You are no longer who you were, but you are not yet fully who you are becoming. There is no celebration. There is no applause. There is no concrete proof that the effort is worth it. There is only you, alone with your own thoughts, crossing a territory without a map. This void is, without exaggeration, the point where most transformations die. Not because the person gave up on the right direction, but because they could not endure the absence of immediate results. Modern culture has conditioned everyone to expect instant returns, a like, a reply, a quick validation. And suddenly this person is faced with a process that demands the opposite: patience without guarantees, faith without evidence, effort without applause. It is uncomfortable in an almost unbearable way, But it is precisely in this discomfort that the character of the new identity is being forged. There is a specific kind of silence that only those who have gone through a profound change can recognize. The silence of when you have already closed a door, but the next one has not yet appeared in the hallway. It is not the comfortable silence of one resting after a victory. It is the uncomfortable silence of one who no longer knows which character they are playing. In this interval, it is common for the mind to start negotiating. Perhaps I went too fast. Perhaps it would be safer to turn back. Perhaps all this change makes no sense at all. These negotiations do not arrive as great crises. They arrive as small, almost administrative thoughts, repeated several times a day, until the person, exhausted from arguing with themselves, begins to consider giving in. It is exactly at this point that the crossing decides its outcome, not in the strength of the initial impulse for change, but in the silent stubbornness to continue, day after day, without proof, without applause, with no one noticing the effort. Think biologically for a moment. Before any visible metamorphosis, there is a period of complete dissolution inside the cocoon, where the old structure breaks down almost entirely before the new form begins to organize itself. From the outside, it seems like nothing is happening. From the inside, everything is being rebuilt, cell by cell. The void you are crossing now is not stagnation. It is invisible reconstruction. And the problem is not in the process. It is in the expectation that the transformation should be visible all the time. It is precisely at this point, when the silence and the absence of proof weigh the heaviest, that the difference between quitting and continuing comes down to a single thing: having or not having a method that sustains your confidence when external evidence has not yet arrived. It was for this exact moment that the Código do Despertar was designed. 60 days of daily structure, so you don't have to cross the void based on willpower alone, but with clarity, direction, and small internal proofs of progress every day. Comment "Eu escolho evoluir" in the first pinned comment before closing this video. The crossing is shorter when you do not walk blindly. What exists on the other side of this crossing is rarely what the person imagined when the process began. It is not fame. It is not instant wealth. It is not widespread recognition. It is something quieter and at the same time more definitive: control over one's own mind. And curiously, it is exactly this control, not money, not success, not approval, that Jung identified as the true measure of a human being's psychological victory. Think about how many decisions you have made throughout your life, motivated by the fear of judgment, instead of being motivated by what you actually wanted. Think about how many times you swallowed an opinion, hid a desire, postponed a dream, just to avoid bothering, avoid disappointing, avoid looking too different. This is the old identity operating on autopilot, an identity built on fear disguised as prudence, on a need for approval disguised as humility, on survival disguised as responsibility. Mental sovereignty begins exactly when these disguises fall away, when you realize that you can feel fear and act anyway, when you realize that the opinions of others, no matter how loud, no longer need to determine your next choice. When you realize that disappointing someone occasionally is the inevitable price of being true to yourself, and that this price, contrary to what your old identity insisted on saying, is perfectly affordable. This is the winning stage that Jung described indirectly throughout his entire work. Not an external victory measured by possessions or applause, but an internal victory measured by the absence of emotional slavery. A free person is not one who never feels fear, doubt, or loneliness. It is one who is no longer governed by them. And this freedom, ironically, only becomes possible after going through everything that came before: the collapse of the old identity, the struggle between evolving and regressing, the silence of individuation, the signs of a new consciousness, the abandonment of mere survival, the void without proof. You can close this video now and return to the life you already know. Continue procrastinating, continue performing, continue hoping that something external will change first so that you might, perhaps, allow yourself to change afterward. Or you can accept that the discomfort you felt throughout these minutes was no coincidence. It was recognition. And recognition, once it happens, is not easily undone. The illusion that victory comes from the outside has already been dismantled. What you do with this information from now on is entirely up to you.